Welcome back to another episode of Walked In. Tonight I'm joined by my co host, Rev, and we're going to be looking at some interesting news that broke yesterday from when this video is published, and that is how the 12 team playoff will work in college football next year. So, there's been lots of questions since we lost a whole entire conference in the Power Five, being the Pac 12, since all the teams just relocated into new conferences. So there's been lots of questions on how it's going to work and what teams will play each other and how are they going to rank them and so on and so on. So, they released a statement today on how it's all going to work, and that's what we're going to go over today.
So, obviously, with the Pac-12's departure, it changed the game, like Chance was saying. Before that happened over this last year, the plan was to do the top six conference champions would have automatic bids into the playoff, and then the next six to highest ranked teams, based on the CFP committee, would then be the fill out the remaining spots in the playoff bracket. Now, with the loss of a Power Five conference, we have changed to the top five. So we have the top four, which would be almost all the time, save maybe just a stellar season by a team, maybe like Cincinnati a couple of years ago. Top four will be your Power Four conferences, the champions of those: the ACC, the SEC, the Big Ten, and the Big 12. And then your fifth automatic bid is your highest conference championship winner out of the group of five teams. So this last year, that would have been Liberty. What doesn't seem to change, at least the way that this has been written, is that fifth team does not automatically get the fifth seed. The seeds for the top four buys are for your top four conference champions in that order. And like I said just a second ago, unless you have a crazy good season by one team in the group of five, like Cincinnati had, and you have maybe some down teams or maybe just a couple losses among all the teams in the top of one Power Five conference, you're typically not going to see that group of five eclipse into the top four and get a bye. It is possible. It has happened as Cincinnati did get in the top four when we only had four. But going forward, this is going to be the new setup. Uh, the four highest ranked conference champions will be seeded 1 through 4, and they get first round buys. Seeds 5 through 12, which will be dictated by the CFP, will then play each other in the first round. Higher seed teams will play host in the first round games. Here's a breakdown of the first round matchups. So 5 plays 12, 5 hosts. 6 plays 11, 6 hosts, and so on. New Year's Six bowl games will be introduced in the quarterfinal round. Semifinals will be played in bowls on a rotating basis, while the national championship host site is determined through bids by prospective host sites. Now, something else that was, I guess, an interesting topic before we found some clarification was how the seeding would work, whether they would reseed after the first round to continuously give the first round team the lowest seed to play. So basically, in I guess in example terms, if 5 plays 12 and 12 beats 5, will then 12 be playing number 1? So that's how the changing of the seeds would happen. It's the brackets wouldn't be locked in. So that way, the number 1 seed will constantly be playing the lowest seed. Now, there are some tournaments and stuff that I've seen where that is the case, where they reseed every round. So the number 1 seed has the easiest path to the championship based on the fact that they deserve that as the number 1 seed. But typically speaking, that we see in the NCAA, it doesn't work that way. They have a static bracket, so teams can know one of the two teams that they have a chance of playing, whether they want to prepare for that or just know who it's going to be. And they go by the average of the lowest seed that they could play. So in that 5 playing 12 scenario, yes, it'd be great if number 1 only has to play number 12 if 12 somehow beats 5. But by just the seeding in general, 5 is going to be favored over number 12. So if 5 beats 12, you wouldn't want number 1 having to play number 5. You would want them to play the lowest seed that's favored, which would have been 8. So the way that works going forward then is the first seed will play the winner of 8 and 9. And the second seed will play the winner of 10. Yeah, there you go.
10 and 7.
Right, 10 and 7. Then you have 3 playing the winner of 6 and 11, and 4 playing the winner of 4 and 12. Or sorry, 4 seed playing 5 and 12. So that's the way this is going to shake out. Unfortunately, I guess this is probably better for the sport. That fifth spot is not just automatically given to that group of five team. Unfortunate for group of five teams. Obviously, the way that it was set this last year, unless you have a stellar team, it's not impossible, but very improbable to see that 12 seed go to the very end and see that group of five team go to the very end. Obviously, they're already things are stacked against them just because of the type of teams that they play. Unless they had a better conference or out of conference schedule, they're typically going to be playing weaker teams and not be ready for those big dogs. So it's already very difficult for them. But I will say with this setup, if they happen to be the number 12 seed, which typically you would imagine they would be, then after that, they don't have to go straight to number one, which is nice. They would go to the lowest seed remaining in the bye, which would be 4. So it's at least a little bit of an easier path, but not as much as if they would have been a 5 seed
Yeah.
because they would have been able to host.
Yeah, and also one thing in that is I don't know where it is, but the remaining 7 that get in, they will be picked by the college football playoff selection committee as they picked it this year. So with that being said, you could see 5 total SEC teams in, or 5 Big Ten, whatever you want. And I just think that's something that's crazy because, there was all the talks about limiting it to 3 or limiting it to 4. So I really just think that's something.
So right here, this is a different article on NCAA's website. No conference will qualify automatically, and there will be no limit on the number of participants from a conference. So that's what Chance is talking about here. There was an idea that Chance is alluding to that they were going to only allow 3 at most from each conference getting in. So you'd have your conference champion of that conference, and then your runner-up, which automatically what you would assume would be the loser in the championship game, and then the third, so the one that the one that just got left out. With this change, and I don't know at what point that changed in their mind, whether it was before they made this announcement or not. But obviously, based on seeding, let's say that next year, the one that we talk about to not only the SEC, because you are probably looking at 6 possible teams that are going to be fighting for those spots that are all going to be, geared to having a really good season next year. Maybe more than that, but just the ones that going into the offseason, you had 6 teams that looked more impressive. But you also have a Big Ten, which has gotten some powerhouses out of the Pac 12, namely Oregon being the big one. Obviously, Washington just had a stellar season, but they're probably going to be a little bit down. But you have Oregon, Penn State, Michigan, Ohio State as at least 4 that you're probably going to be looking at having 0 to 2 losses by the end of the season. Now, based on scheduling, some of those teams might have more losses. Like Michigan has a tougher schedule than Ohio State by far, but Michigan can still win those games. So you have a very competitive conference in the Big Ten, a very competitive conference in the SEC, where you can look for them to dominate most of those spots. And I don't love that necessarily, just because I feel like you close the door to other teams, but at the same time, you don't want to see a weak team get basically an automatic bid just because they came in second place, even though the other conference over there, their 5th place team is easily better than your second place team. So it makes for more parity. But on the other hand, if you're not a fan of the Big Ten, you're not a fan of the SEC, you can easily make an argument of, well, this is more of the same crap. They're obviously very much biased. Yes, but there's a reason the bias exists. I do agree that there is bias. Being an FSU fan, I resonate with that. But you can't deny how much more competitive conferences look in the national stage when you have the Big Ten and the SEC versus the Big 12 or the ACC.
Yeah, and
I
if you would
do. Go ahead.
go back to that first article
Yeah.
and scroll down and see what it would have been ranked. Yeah, go up a little bit. Yeah, so that's the rankings from this year. So that kind of gives you an idea who would have been in.
So you would have had the first 11, and then Oklahoma would have been left out because of the automatic bid by the conference champion,
Well,
which would have been
technically,
Liberty.
you'd also had to add in. Oh yeah, that's right. That's right. said because Texas was still in the Big 12 last year.
Yes.
So you would
So
have,
this list is a little bit skewed because this is basing off of 6 conference champions, because
yeah,
that's how many we had, versus, you still had the pack existing. So Florida State would have been 5 and Liberty would have been number 6, and they would have played each other based on this setting. Now, again, the reason that Liberty is put at that 12 is because they're the lowest out of all these teams. But if, for whatever reason dictates, if they were at number 7, then they would be the 7th seed. And then you would, the 13th then, I guess that's how that would, no, it would just be the first 12. So it would be the first 12 in that way. So then Oklahoma, let's say you replace Missouri with Liberty and Liberty had been number 9, Oklahoma would have got in if Missouri was down at the bottom.
yeah,
So it's still, obviously there's still a door open for a group of 5 school, which I appreciate that. I'm a big fan of Liberty. I went to school there. So I'm glad that you have that door open for a good team. I was a massive fan of Cincinnati when they were making their run. And then obviously I'm not a UCF fan, but they did not an argument for being a national champion, but they did have an argument for being left out considering they beat some of the top teams that year. So I like seeing the ability for a Cinderella story to happen. I do feel like within the context of football, it is a lot more of a long shot than it would be, say, for March Madness for college basketball, because the games are just so different, and the way that this is structured and who they'll have to play. They're still going to have to play great opponents, but football is just is measured so differently than basketball when it comes to just the game and how it's going to end up. And typically, you will not see a team that can hold up to the level and depth of a big school when you're a smaller school. Now, again, there are exceptions, obviously, that we've already talked about.
yeah. So pretty interesting outlook for next year's season. So I thought we'd just get ahead of it and see what it kind of look like. But I really think this is gonna ultimately help out with college football and bowl games because most of the bowl games are just pointless. Especially like the New York Six bowl games, which will now be converted into, your playoff games, and I
They
really
all
like
matter
that.
now.
Yeah, they all matter, so you don't have as many opt outs, and that's something that I really like because you had a bunch of opt outs and games didn't matter as much to the players, and you had people trash talking Florida State about their culture because of that. While it is all fun and games, most of the time, it's a real thing. It could hurt programs, but I really think this is going to be ultimately good. And now we just need to get an IL finished and fixed out. So
I will throw a wrench into this, and that's just based off some, I guess, rumors, but there is some heavy weight behind it. There's obviously, if you follow the ACC or Florida State or just the goings on with college football, Florida State and the ACC, and there's also other extensions like ESPN could get involved and maybe the NCAA. They are currently locked in a legal battle right now. The ACC or FSU is suing the ACC for a couple of different reasons, but it's more about trying to get out of the conference. And they are saying that the grant of rights and some other things that have happened were not truthful or not binding as they say they are. And there's a bunch to it, a lot of legal speak. But what is interesting is the last statement of the ACC has appeared to indicate that they are willing to work with FSU and possibly settle. And what that tells me is, one, they don't want this thing going further than it needs to because that will probably expose some stuff. And I think there probably are some other groups that don't want that to happen. But also, that might mean that FSU has a way out a lot easier than the $540 million that were reported they had to pay to get out. And that also would be another indicator of a different conference shift. And then just yesterday, there were a lot of people reporting, and this is still just rumor, it's not substantiated, but the people who are reporting it are generally right on what they report. And they have reported that the SEC is posturing to get FSU and Clemson, and the Big Ten is trying to, or I guess the other way around. FSU and Clemson are looking to join the SEC, and the Big Ten is looking at UVA and North Carolina. So, University of Virginia and the University of North Carolina are looking to join the Big Ten. The rest of the ACC would have to kind of reformulate and become a non-Power Five conference, or I guess Power Four currently. What that would mean is obviously your two biggest get
I mean,
better.
technically, you could have two join the Big 12 as well.
Yeah, so I think that the Big 12 is probably going to try and get an expansion out of that too. Like SMU would make sense because currently SMU is in the ACC and they're right in Big 12 country. But there are some, I guess, more wrenches to be thrown in this college football playoff system. Now, is that going to change the schedule for 2024? No, there's
So
no
it shouldn't
way.
change until at least 2026.
More than likely, you're looking at a 2 year window, just like we saw with Texas and Oklahoma. But this format, you could see this format change in 2 more years if those things are happening. Obviously, you have the two biggest programs in the ACC looking to move out and join the SEC, and then the two bigger minus Duke, the basketball programs, and UNC has had a good football team for the last 5 years, 4 years. So obviously some big names leaving another Power Five conference, and you can look at losing another one, and they would turn more into like a Big East rather than just being dissolved like the Pac-12. They would just turn probably into a more basketball conference, and then have a football schedule. And I guess Miami just got left out of that. Miami was not mentioned in any of the things that I read yesterday or today, and I guess poor Miami. But I'm an FSU fan, so it sucks for you.
Yeah. But with all that being said, any updates, we'll be here to give you all the news and all our insights that we have. Film is what we're best at, in my opinion, and I love film more than news or anything else. But we'll try to keep everybody in the loop and spread all this information out. With that being said, though, for me and Rev, stay locked in, everyone.